Julian Thorne existed in a world of polished glass and muted chrome, a silent kingdom 40 stories above the twinkling city. From his corner office, the festive chaos of Christmas Eve was reduced to a beautiful, sterile diorama. Tiny cars with glowing headlights streamed through streets dusted with the first persistent snowfall of the season. People, bundled and indistinct, hurried along sidewalks, their arms laden with brightly wrapped packages. They were part of a life he observed but no longer inhabited. The silence in his office was absolute, a heavy blanket woven from grief and time. It was a silence he had cultivated, a fortress against the noise of a world that had moved on without him. He had just concluded a hostile takeover via a video conference call, his voice a monotone scalpel that dissected a rival company with brutal precision. There were no congratulations, no celebratory drinks. His team had learned years ago that such displays were unwelcome. Success was merely an expectation, a distraction from the hollowness that echoed in the vast, empty spaces of his life. He ended the call and swiveled his chair to face the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights blurred, becoming a constellation of shattered stars. On the expansive, uncluttered surface of his mahogany desk sat a single object that did not belong. A small silver locket, tarnished with age and the ghost of 1,000 touches. It was a relic from the before time, a life that felt like it had belonged to another man. His hand, steady and sure when signing billion-dollar contracts, trembled slightly as he picked it up. The clasp gave way with a familiar, faint click. Inside, 2 tiny photographs were nestled. One was of his wife, Sarah, her smile so radiant it seemed to generate its own light. The other was of his daughter, a 5-year-old girl with Sarah's smile and his own serious eyes, her name also a casualty of his grief, a word he never allowed himself to speak. Lily. The name was a whisper of pain in the tomb of his heart. They were gone, lost to a slick patch of ice on a snowy night, just like this one, 6 years ago. He had been driving. A single, hot tear escaped, tracing a path down his cheek before he swiped it away with brutal impatience, the mask of the unfeeling CEO. The wounded executive slipped back into place, but the silence was no longer a comfort. It was an accusation. The sterile quiet of the office, the echoing emptiness of his mansion in the suburbs, it was all a monument to his failure. He needed to move. He needed to escape the ghost in the locket. He grabbed his tailored wool overcoat and left without a word to the skeletal holiday staff. He didn't know where he was going. He just drove. The luxury sedan moved like a phantom through the snow-swept streets, its interior as silent and cold as his office. He passed theaters draped in garlands, restaurants filled with laughing families, parks where children were trying to catch snowflakes on their tongues. Each scene was a fresh twist of the knife, a reminder of the warmth he could see but never feel. Miles away, in a less glamorous part of the city, Clara was trying to turn a long, cold walk home into an adventure. Her old car had finally given up that morning, its engine sputtering to a final, definitive silence. The repair bill was a figure she couldn't even contemplate until after the holidays. So they walked. Her daughter, Lily, was bundled in a puffy pink coat that was a size too big, a hand-me-down from a neighbor. "Mommy, look." Lily's small, mittened hand pointed towards a storefront window where a miniature train circled a mountain of fake snow. "The train is going to see Santa." Clara forced a smile, her own face numb from the wind. "It sure is, sweetie. And Santa is getting ready to visit you tonight." She pulled Lily's red knit hat down further over her ears, trying to shield her from the biting cold. They were a small island of warmth in the freezing air, their shared breath misting in front of them. Clara's job as a waitress didn't pay much, but it was enough. Just enough. Their small apartment was cramped. The furniture was second-hand, but it was a space filled with a fierce and gentle love. She was a nurturing healer, mending the small scrapes on her daughter's knees and the larger bruises on her own heart with unwavering patience and kindness. The wind picked up, a mournful howl that whipped snow into their faces. Lily's cheerful chatter began to fade, replaced by a slight shiver that Clara could feel through their linked hands. "Are we almost home, Mummy?" "Almost, my love. Just a few more blocks," Clara said, her voice more confident than she felt. She could see Lily's lips, the only part of her face not covered by a scarf, were beginning to take on a pale bluish tint. A knot of worry tightened in her stomach. It was then that a long, sleek black car, the kind you only saw in movies, slowed to a stop just ahead of them. A soft, thumping sound, followed by a hiss, signaled a flat tire. A man emerged from the driver's side, his silhouette sharp and imposing against the swirling snow. He wore a dark, expensive-looking coat, and his expression, illuminated by a nearby streetlight, was a mask of cold frustration. He kicked the offending tire lightly, a gesture of pure annoyance. Julian Thorne stared at the flattened rubber with disbelief. Of all the nights on this street, in this weather, it was a pathetic, mundane inconvenience. Yet it felt like the universe was mocking him, trapping him in the very world of messy reality he sought to escape. He pulled out his phone to call his driver, his fingers stiff with cold. He was so absorbed in his own irritation that he didn't notice the small figure in pink approaching him until she was standing right at his knee. He looked down, startled. A little girl, her face mostly obscured by a red hat and scarf, was looking up at him with wide, curious eyes. Her gaze was direct, utterly devoid of the fear or deference he was used to from adults. Lily had seen the big, dark car and thought it looked warm, like a cozy cave. She saw the tall man standing alone in the snow, and he looked cold. He looked sad, like the lost puppy in her storybook. Without a second thought, she had let go of her mother's hand and walked towards him. Her voice, small but clear against the wind, cut through the armor Julian had spent 6 years building. "Mister," she asked, a puff of white air escaping her lips, "can I warm up in your car?" The question was so simple, so innocent, it struck him with the force of a physical blow. He stared down at her, at the dusting of snowflakes on her eyelashes, at the slight blue tinge of her lips. A ghost of a memory, sharp and exquisitely painful, surfaced. Another little girl, in another car, on another snowy night, her own lips blue for a very different reason. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The world tilted, the streetlights blurred, and all he could see was his own daughter's face superimposed over this small stranger's. "Lily!" Clara's voice was sharp with panic. She rushed forward, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She grabbed her daughter's shoulder gently. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, sir. She shouldn't have bothered you. Lily, apologize to the gentleman." But Julian didn't hear her apology. He was still locked in the little girl's gaze. The word, sir, the formal address, sounded absurd. He was just a man, with a flat tire and a shattered heart. He looked from the child to her mother. He saw the worn fabric of Clara's coat, the exhaustion etched around her eyes, and the fierce, protective love with which she held her daughter. They were not a threat. They were just cold. Something deep inside him, a mechanism of human decency he thought had rusted shut long ago, began to turn. He found his voice, surprised at how rough and unused it sounded. "It's all right," he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. He cleared his throat. "Please, it's too cold for her to be out here." He moved to the passenger side of the car and opened the heavy door, releasing a wave of warm, leather-scented air into the freezing night. "Both of you, get in. I'll call for assistance." Clara hesitated, taken aback by the unexpected kindness from this severe-looking man. But one look at Lily's shivering form decided for her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with relief. She helped Lily clamber onto the plush, heated leather seat before sliding in beside her. The door closed, with a solid, satisfying thud, shutting out the wind and the cold. The silence inside the car was a different kind of silence than the one in Julian's office. It was filled with the soft hum of the engine and the sound of Lily's happy sigh as the warmth enveloped her. She immediately began to chatter, her words tumbling out in a rush, now that her lips were no longer numb. "Wow, Mommy, it's like a spaceship. Does it have a button for hot chocolate?" Clara shushed her gently, her cheeks still pink with a mixture of cold and mortification. She glanced at the man in the driver's seat. He was on the phone now, his voice low and authoritative, arranging for another car. Yet she noticed his eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, to the reflection of her daughter, who was now happily fogging up the window with her breath. There was an expression on his face she couldn't quite decipher, a deep, aching sadness mixed with something else, something softer. Julian ended the call. His personal driver was 20 minutes away with a replacement vehicle. 20 minutes. He should have told them to wait outside or found them a bus stop. That would have been the efficient, logical thing to do. But the thought of sending them back into the biting wind was unbearable. The sound of the child's chatter, a sound so painfully absent from his life, was a strange sort of music. It didn't fill the emptiness inside him, but it made him acutely aware of its dimensions. "My driver is on his way," he stated, his tone more formal than he intended. "He can drop you wherever you need to go." "You've already done more than enough," Clara said quickly. "We only live a few blocks away. We can walk from here once we're warmed up, thank you." She was wary of accepting too much from this stranger, no matter how kind his gesture. Life had taught her that such kindness often came with strings attached. But Lily, unburdened by such cynicism, leaned forward between the seats. "We live in the big building with the wobbly snowman. Out front, he loses his carrot nose all the time." Julian's lips twitched. It wasn't a smile, not yet, but it was the closest he had come in a very long time. He met Clara's eyes in the rearview mirror, and for a fleeting second, a connection was made. Two adults sharing a moment of gentle humor initiated by a child. When the other car, a clone of the first, pulled up silently behind them, Julian made another impulsive decision. "I'll take you," he said, before he could second-guess himself. "It's no trouble." He got out and spoke to his driver, who looked surprised, but quickly transferred Julian's briefcase to the new car. Julian held the door for Clara and Lily, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that felt both awkward and right. The drive to their apartment building was short. Lily, cocooned in the warmth and lulled by the motion of the car, soon fell fast asleep in the back, her head resting against the soft leather. The sudden silence was thick but not uncomfortable. It was a shared, peaceful quiet. "I really can't thank you enough," Clara said softly, breaking the silence as they pulled up in front of a modest, slightly run-down brick building. A snowman, just as Lily had described, stood tilted near the entrance, a single charcoal eye staring up at the snowy sky. It was missing its nose. "It was nothing," Julian replied, the automatic, dismissive phrase sounding hollow even to him. It was not nothing. The past hour had unsettled him more than any boardroom battle. He had felt something. A flicker, a painful, terrifying, and yet undeniably welcome flicker of life. He watched as Clara gently woke Lily and helped her from the car. He saw the stark contrast between his world of insulated luxury and theirs of threadbare resilience. Before she closed the door, Clara paused and looked at him, her expression sincere. "You have no idea what this meant to us tonight. Merry Christmas, mister." She trailed off, realizing she didn't even know his name. "Julian," he supplied. "My name is Julian." "Merry Christmas, Julian," she said, with a small, genuine smile. Then she and Lily were gone, disappearing into the building, leaving him alone once more in the silent, warm car. He sat there for a long time, the engine humming softly, watching the entrance to the building, a strange and unfamiliar ache spreading through his chest. It was not the familiar cold ache of grief. This was something new, something that felt dangerously like hope. Christmas morning dawned, grey and silent, in his sprawling, minimalist mansion. The only sound was the faint hum of the climate control system. Julian stood in the cavernous kitchen, a mug of black coffee in his hand, staring out at the pristine, untouched snow covering his vast lawn. The house was a museum of a life that had ended abruptly. Sarah's decorating magazines were still stacked neatly on a shelf. Lily's crayon drawings, professionally framed, hung in a sterile hallway, their vibrant colors a mockery of the home's monochrome palette. He had slept poorly, his dreams haunted by the face of a little girl with blue lips and wide, trusting eyes. He couldn't shake the image of Clara's tired but gentle face, or the sound of Lily's innocent chatter. Their small world, glimpsed for only a moment, had been so full of a life that was absent from his. The check he had mentally written for them, a large, anonymous donation to assuage his conscience, now felt crass and insufficient. He found himself dialing the number for a high-end catering company he kept on retainer. "I need a full Christmas dinner delivered," he said, his voice clipped and decisive. "Everything. Turkey, ham, all the sides, and desserts. For a family of 3. He gave them Clara's address, which he had committed to memory. He invented a plausible lie. "My own plans have been unexpectedly cancelled. Tell them it's from a secret Santa." It was a clumsy, awkward gesture, but it was an action. It was better than sinking back into the grey stillness of his grief. In their small apartment, Clara and Lily were making the best of their meagre holiday. Their Christmas dinner was going to be macaroni and cheese, and Lily's main present was a second-hand doll that Clara had painstakingly cleaned and dressed in new, handmade clothes. They were singing carols off-key when a knock came at the door. The delivery of a feast fit for royalty left Clara speechless. The note simply read, "So, that a wobbly snowman's family can have a warm meal? Merry Christmas." She knew instantly who it was. From the anonymous act of kindness was so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Julian couldn't stay away. A day later, he appeared at their door holding a large, elaborate dollhouse. It was in storage," he stammered, feeling like a clumsy teenager. "I thought your daughter might like it." Lily's gasp of delight was all the thanks he needed. He found himself on the floor of their small living room, helping her arrange the miniature furniture, his long legs folded uncomfortably beneath him. Clara watched from the doorway, a soft smile on her face. She saw past the expensive suit and the guarded expression. She saw a man drowning in a sea of unspoken sorrow, and Lily had just thrown him a lifeline. This became their new, unspoken routine. Julian would find excuses: a trip to the grocery store where he bought far more than they needed, a drive to the park on a sunny afternoon. He began driving Clara to her waitressing job in the evenings, waiting in the car and reading on his tablet until her shift ended just to ensure she got home safely. He told himself it was a charitable project, a way to ease the guilt that had plagued him for years. But he knew it was a lie. He was drawn to the simple, uncomplicated warmth of their home. The scent of cinnamon and laundry detergent in their apartment felt more real, more alive, than the sterile air of his mansion. One evening, after a particularly long day, Lily fell asleep on the sofa while watching a cartoon. Clara gently lifted her and carried her to her small bedroom. When she returned, she found Julian standing by the little electric fireplace, staring at a framed photograph on the mantel. It was a picture of Lily as a baby, swaddled in a pink blanket, her face scrunched up in a tiny yawn. His hand was unconsciously touching his chest, where the silver locket always lay hidden beneath his shirt. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. "She was so tiny," Clara said softly, coming to stand beside him. "I can hardly believe she was ever that small." Julian didn't respond for a moment. He slowly drew the locket out from under his collar. His fingers fumbled with the clasp. He opened it and held it out for her to see. Clara looked at the faded photographs of the smiling woman and the little girl with the serious eyes. She looked so much like the man standing beside her. "My wife, Sarah." Julian's voice was a raw whisper. "And our daughter. Her name was also Lily." The confession hung in the air, fragile and heavy. Clara's heart constricted with a sudden, sharp empathy. All the pieces clicked into place. His loneliness, his initial reaction to Lily, his quiet, persistent kindness. It wasn't charity. It was a pilgrimage back to the land of the living. He began to talk, the words pouring out of him as if a dam had finally broken. He spoke of the accident, the blinding snow, the screech of tires. He spoke of the crushing guilt that had been his only companion for 6 years, the feeling that he had failed in his one true duty, to protect his family. He talked about the silence, the endless, echoing silence of his life after they were gone. Clara didn't interrupt. She didn't offer empty platitudes or say that it wasn't his fault. She simply stood beside him and listened. She listened to the pain, the regret, the profound love that still existed in every word he spoke. When he finally fell silent, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his confession, she reached out and gently placed her hand on his arm. It was a simple, grounding touch, an anchor in his storm-tossed sea of grief. "Thank you for telling me," she said, her voice full of a warmth that seeped through his coat, through his skin, and into the coldest corners of his heart. In her eyes, he didn't see pity. He saw understanding. He saw acceptance. For the first time in 6 years, he didn't feel entirely alone with his ghosts. The bond between them deepened after that night. The pretense of charity fell away, replaced by a genuine, fragile affection. A few days later, as New Year's Eve approached, Lily sat at the small kitchen table, a box of crayons spread out before her. She was drawing with intense concentration. When she finished, she held it up for Julian to see. The drawing was simple, childishly rendered. There was a tall stick figure with dark hair, a smaller one with brown hair, and a tiny one in a pink dress standing between them. The two taller figures were each holding one of the small figure's hands. Above them, a bright yellow sun smiled down. "Look," she announced proudly, "it's our family. That's you, and that's Mommy, and that's me." Julian stared at the piece of paper. The simple crayon lines held a power that struck him breathless. A family, a word he had banished from his vocabulary, a concept he had relegated to his past. Lily wasn't replacing the daughter he had lost. She was creating a new space, a new possibility. She was offering him a future he never, in his wildest dreams, had dared to imagine for himself. He felt a terrifying, exhilarating surge of hope, and for the first time, he wondered if he was brave enough to accept it. Buoyed by this newfound hope, Julian did something reckless. His company's annual New Year's Gala was a massive, soulless affair he usually endured for a contractually obligated hour before retreating. This year, he wanted to go with Clara. He wanted to stand in a crowded room with her by his side. He invited her with a surprising lack of his usual awkwardness. Her hesitation was palpable. "Julian, I don't have anything to wear to something like that. I would be so out of place." The next afternoon, a courier delivered a long, elegant box to her apartment. Inside was a deep emerald green dress, simple but exquisitely cut, along with shoes and a small clutch. The note read only, "Please, for me." Walking into the grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel on Julian's arm, Clara felt like she had stepped into another world. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of people dressed in designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air buzzed with polite, predatory conversation and the clinking of champagne flutes. Julian, in his element, was a different man, confident, powerful, nodding curtly to business titans and political figures. But he never let go of her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a small, reassuring gesture. They were an anomaly, and the whispers followed them. People looked from the formidable Julian Thorne to the quiet, unknown woman beside him, their eyes full of speculation. Clara tried to ignore the curious stares, focusing on the warmth of Julian's hand in hers, The moment that shattered the fragile illusion came from a man named Marcus Vance, a business rival Julian had bested one too many times. Vance approached them with a smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Thorne," he said, his gaze sweeping over Clara with dismissive appraisal. "I see you're embracing the holiday spirit." He leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial, venomous whisper meant only for Julian. "Picking up strays for the holidays? How very charitable of you. A lovely tax deduction, I'm sure." The word, strays, hit Julian like a physical blow. It was a cruel, perfect articulation of his deepest, darkest fear. The fear that this wasn't real, that he was just using Clara and Lily to patch the gaping hole in his own life, that he was a damaged, broken man trying to find solace by appropriating their goodness, their light. He saw himself through Vance's cynical eyes, a wealthy patron playing with the lives of the less fortunate. The guilt was instantaneous and suffocating. His posture stiffened, the warmth drained from his expression, replaced by the familiar, icy mask of control. He turned to Clara, his eyes suddenly distant and unreadable. "I need to speak with someone. Wait here." He walked away, without a backward glance, leaving her alone and exposed in the center of the glittering ballroom. He didn't return for 20 minutes. When he did, the fragile magic of the evening was gone. He was cold, remote. The drive home was shrouded in a heavy, unbearable silence. Clara sat beside him, the beautiful green dress feeling like a costume, her heart aching with confusion and a sense of profound humiliation. She didn't know what had happened, only that the warm, vulnerable man who had confessed his grief to her was gone, replaced by the intimidating stranger she had first met on that snowy street. When they reached her building, he didn't get out of the car. He kept his eyes fixed on the windshield. "Thank you for accompanying me," he said, the words formal and empty. It was a dismissal. Clara fled from the car, holding back tears until she was safely inside her apartment. She didn't understand. What had she done wrong? The beautiful evening had curdled into something ugly and painful, and she had no idea why. The next day, there was no call, no text, just a courier at her door with a long, official-looking envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for a staggering amount of money, enough to buy a new car, pay her rent for years, and erase every one of her financial worries. And beneath it, a short, typed note on heavy cream-colored letterhead. "Clara, thank you for your time. This should help with any immediate needs. I wish you and your daughter all the best. Sincerely, Julian Thorne." It was a severance, a payment for services rendered. The cold, corporate finality of it was more brutal than any angry words could have been. He was erasing them. Clara sank onto her sofa, the check fluttering from her numb fingers to the floor. It wasn't the money she had wanted. It was him. It was the fledgling hope of a family. The tears she had been holding back finally came, hot and bitter. He had broken her heart. She tried to hide her sorrow from Lily, but children are perceptive. Lily knew something was wrong. "Is Mr. Julian coming to play today?" she asked, her voice small. Clara's voice broke as she tried to answer. "No, sweetie, I don't think we'll be seeing Mr. Thorne anymore." Lily's lower lip trembled. She didn't understand the complexities of adult emotions, the way fear could masquerade as cruelty. She only understood the sudden absence of a person who had become a vital part of her small world. She disappeared into her room and returned a moment later, holding the crayon drawing she had made. "He forgot his picture," she said, with the simple, unwavering logic of a 5-year-old. "We have to mail it to him, so he doesn't forget us." Clara looked at the drawing of the 3 smiling stick figures holding hands. It was a portrait of a happiness that had been snatched away. Every instinct told her to throw it away, to forget Julian Thorne and his hot and cold cruelty. But, looking at her daughter's earnest face, she felt a final, desperate flicker of hope. With nothing left to lose, she found an envelope, folded the drawing carefully, and addressed it to Julian Thorne at his towering office building downtown. It was a final, silent plea sent out into the cold, uncaring city. The envelope, a simple, flimsy thing amidst a mountain of corporate mail, landed on Julian's desk. His secretary, assuming it was from a charity, had placed it in the low-priority pile. He spent 2 days marinating in his own misery. The silence of his mansion, more oppressive than ever. He had done the right thing, he told himself. He had cut them loose before his own darkness could taint them. He had protected them from his grief. It was a noble sacrifice, but it felt like self-mutilation. Finally, his gaze fell on the small envelope. He recognized Clara's neat handwriting. His heart hammered against his ribs. He tore it open with unsteady hands. It wasn't a letter, it was the drawing. He stared at the 3 crayon figures under the smiling sun. Our family, Lily's voice echoed in his memory. He saw the simple, unwavering truth in the drawing. It wasn't a depiction of a fantasy. It was a statement of fact from a child who saw things with perfect clarity. He hadn't been a benefactor or a patron. He had been a father. He had been a partner. He had been happy. The crushing realization of his mistake washed over him. He hadn't been protecting them by pushing them away. He had been protecting himself. He was a coward, so terrified of repeating the pain of his past, of losing love again, that he had preemptively destroyed the first real chance at a future he'd had in 6 years. He had chosen the familiar, cold comfort of grief over the terrifying, brilliant risk of happiness. The drawing was not an accusation. It was an invitation, a last chance. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat and ran from the office, leaving his stunned secretary in his wake. He drove through the city, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, a single prayer repeating in his mind, "Please don't be too late. Please let me not be too late." He took the stairs to their 3rd-floor apartment, 2 at a time, his lungs burning. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Clara opened it. Her eyes were shadowed, her face pale. She was holding a small, worn suitcase. The sight of it sent a spear of ice through his chest. She was leaving. He had driven her away. "Julian," she said, her voice flat, devoid of its usual warmth. The words tumbled out of him, raw and unedited, stripped of all his usual corporate polish. "I'm a fool. I'm a coward." His voice was hoarse with emotion. "That note, that check, it was the cruelest thing I've ever done. I wasn't trying to pay you off. I was trying to run." Vance's words at the party, they hit my deepest fear, that I'm broken, that I'd ruin you and Lily just by being near you. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just protecting myself from feeling anything again. He took a step closer, his eyes pleading with hers. "I don't want to be your benefactor, Clara. I want to be what Lily drew. I want to be the man holding her hand. I want to be the man standing next to you. I love you. I love both of you. And I am so sorry. Please, don't go. Please, give me another chance to be the man that little girl thinks I am." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of a heart that had been broken and was now miraculously being pieced back together. She saw the truth of his confession in the raw vulnerability on his face. She dropped the suitcase, and then, from behind her, a small voice piped up, "You came back for your picture." Lily stood in the doorway, holding her favorite teddy bear. Julian's gaze softened. He knelt down, so he was on her level. "I did," he said, his voice thick. "I would never leave my family's picture behind." He reached out, and Lily ran into his arms, wrapping her small arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Over her shoulder, Julian looked at Clara, his eyes asking a question that his words no longer needed to. Clara nodded, a radiant, tearful smile spreading across her face. He had come home. A year passed, a whirlwind of healing and discovery. The cavernous mansion was slowly filled with life. The scent of baking cookies replaced the sterile air. Lily's toys were scattered across the gleaming hardwood floors, and her laughter echoed in hallways that had only known silence. Julian learned to smile again, a real, easy smile that reached his eyes. Clara, no longer struggling to make ends meet, found her passion in landscape gardening, bringing color and life to the mansion's once manicured but soulless grounds. They were not replacing the family Julian had lost. They were building something new, a beautiful mosaic, forged from broken pieces. On Christmas Eve, 1 year to the day after they met, Julian drove them through the city. The snow was falling again, thick, gentle flakes that blanketed the world in a soft, white peace. Lily, now 6, was in the back seat, chattering excitedly about the presents under the tree, her voice a happy melody in the warm, quiet car. Julian didn't drive towards home. Instead, he navigated the streets until he found the exact spot where his tire had gone flat a lifetime ago. He pulled the car over to the curb and turned off the engine. "Why are we stopping here?" Clara asked, looking around at the familiar, unassuming street. Julian smiled. He got out of the car and came around to open her door. He took her hand, his grip warm and steady, and led her to the patch of sidewalk where a little girl in a pink coat had changed his world. The wobbly snowman was gone, but the memory was as vivid as the falling snow. "This is where it happened," he said softly, his breath misting in the cold air. "This is where my life started again. I thought I was the one offering you shelter from the cold that night." He turned to face her, his eyes full of a love so deep it took her breath away. "But I was wrong. You and Lily, you saved me. You saved me from a cold that had frozen my heart for 6 years." He looked from Clara's beloved face to the car, where Lily was now pressing her face against the window, waving at them with a wide, happy grin. The hollow ache that had been his constant companion was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace and gratitude. He was no longer a ghost observing life from a distance. He was here, in the heart of it, surrounded by love. He had not just found them. He had been found by them. He wrapped his arm around Clara, pulling her close, and together they stood in the softly falling snow, a family, finally and completely home.